The sun had barely breached the horizon when Charlotte Beaumont was already astride her chestnut mare, the cool bite of the Montana dawn clinging to her breath. Below her stretched miles of rolling plains, dotted with restless cattle that snorted clouds into the crisp air. Her foreman, Hank Driscoll, cast her a wary glance from beneath the brim of his battered hat. He didn't say it aloud, but Charlotte knew what simmered in the men's minds. A woman can't run a ranch like this alone. She refused to let their doubts take root. "Push the stragglers toward the north fence," she called out, her voice steady, cutting through the lowing of the herd. When her father had died the previous winter, the Beaumont ranch became hers, along with its debts, its enemies, and the heavy crown of being one of the only women in the territory to manage a spread of 10,000 acres. The ranch hand stayed on because the pay was good and the work steady, but respect, that had to be earned daily. By mid-morning, the cattle drive was done, and Charlotte rode back toward the big white ranch house perched like a sentinel on a hill. Its wide porch, worn smooth by generations, felt empty without her father's boots resting there. Inside, the faint scent of coffee and leather still lingered, mingling with the smell of the old oak floors. She was just hanging her hat on the wall peg when the knock came. Sharp, deliberate. On the other side of the door stood Samuel Weller, an old friend of her father's and owner of the neighboring spread. His gray mustache twitched as he took off his hat. "Mornin', Charlotte. I'm here on a matter of mutual benefit." She raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his boots leaving little dust clouds on her polished floor. "You've been running this place fine enough, but there's talk. Competitors think you're vulnerable. Some think you'll sell. You need someone who can stand beside you. Give the impression you've got solid backing." Charlotte crossed her arms. "If you're here to tell me to remarry, you can save your breath. I've been down that road once. It ended in a grave and a debt ledger." "This wouldn't be for love," Samuel said plainly. "It's business. I know a man, quiet, capable, good with cattle. Doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together, but he's steady. You'd be giving him a roof and a wage. In return, he'd give you a husband's presence. The town would stop whispering about a woman alone, and those who try to take advantage might think twice." Charlotte almost laughed. "So you're matchmaking for appearances?" "Call it survival," he said, his eyes narrowing. "The man's name is Ethan Cole. He's coming through town tomorrow. I suggest you meet him before you say no." The next afternoon, Charlotte rode into the small town of Dry Creek, her mare's hooves clopping against the packed dirt street. She found Samuel in the dim light of the saloon, nursing a drink. Across from him sat a man she didn't recognize. Ethan Cole was lean, his face sun-browned and shadowed by a weak stubble. His clothes were plain, denim shirt, worn boots, hat pulled low. But there was something in the way he sat, calm and deliberate, that made him stand out from the usual drifters who passed through. Samuel gestured. "Charlotte, this is Ethan. Ethan, Charlotte Beaumont." Ethan rose to his feet, removing his hat. His gray eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. "Ma'am, Mr. Cole," she replied, her tone polite but cool. They spoke over coffee instead of whiskey. Charlotte asked about his experience with cattle, his work history, his reasons for drifting. He answered simply, never offering more than she asked, but every word was measured, like a man who weighed the value of speech before using it. When Samuel excused himself to speak with the barkeep, Charlotte leaned in slightly. "Do you understand what's being proposed here?" "I do," Ethan said, his voice low. "It's a marriage on paper. Work for me, security for you. And you're willing to marry a woman you just met?" Ethan's mouth curved in the faintest hint of a smile. "Seems you're willing to do the same." Her cheeks warmed, though she kept her expression unreadable. "This isn't about feelings. It's about protecting what's mine." "I'm not here to take anything from you, Charlotte," he said, using her first name as if testing it. "If anything, I know what it's like to want to keep hold of something you fought for." There was a weight behind the words, something unsaid. She almost pressed him, but stopped. She wasn't here to unravel his past, only to secure her future. 3 days later, the deal was done. The wedding was small, held in the ranch house parlor. The town preacher officiated, his voice droning as the two of them stood side by side. Samuel was the only witness. No flowers, no music, no kiss. After signing the papers, Charlotte poured herself a drink while Ethan stepped outside to smoke. From the window, she watched him survey the land, his gaze traveling the horizon like he was memorizing every line of it. That night, he moved into the spare bedroom at the end of the hall. Before turning in, Charlotte stopped at the doorway. "This doesn't change how I run my ranch," she said. "Wouldn't dream of it," Ethan replied, and there was that faint half-smile again. The next morning, Ethan was up before dawn, working alongside the ranch hands without being told. He moved with quiet efficiency, repairing a broken fence rail, checking the water troughs, guiding the cattle without raising his voice. Hank, who'd barely offered Charlotte more than grunts, actually nodded in approval at Ethan's work. Charlotte watched from the porch, her coffee cooling in her hand. She had expected compliance. What she hadn't expected was competence. Still, she reminded herself, competence didn't erase the fact that she knew nothing about the man she'd just married. And in Montana, strangers always carried stories, some harmless, some dangerous. On the third evening, she found herself riding the fence line at sunset. Ethan joined her without a word, his horse keeping easy pace with hers. For a time, they rode in silence, the sky painted in streaks of gold and crimson. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Your land's good. Rich soil. Plenty of water. Cattle look healthy." She glanced at him. "That's my father's doing. I'm just trying not to lose it." "You won't," he said simply, as if it were a fact, not a hope. The certainty in his voice unsettled her. She didn't know if it came from loyalty or arrogance, or something else entirely. When they reached the far ridge, he reined in and looked toward the distant mountains. "I've seen a lot of land," he murmured, "but this is worth fighting for." Charlotte's pulse skipped. She didn't know why those words, spoken in that low, steady tone, felt like more than just an observation. That night, as she sat by the fire alone, Charlotte realized something she hadn't before. Her bargain with Ethan might have been for survival, but it had opened the door to something far more unpredictable. And unpredictable, in the West, was as dangerous as it was tempting. The first week of marriage passed with the rhythm of the ranch, sunrises, dust, the lowing of cattle, and the scent of fresh-cut hay. Yet inside the Beaumont ranch house, the air carried a subtle tension, like the taut string of a fiddle before the first note. Ethan Cole kept mostly to himself. He ate meals at the long pine table, but rarely spoke, unless spoken to. At night, his door closed promptly after the dishes were washed, and Charlotte would hear the faint creak of the floorboards as he moved about in his room. He wasn't unfriendly, but he wasn't familiar either, like a man walking a fence line, testing each post before stepping further. Charlotte had thought sharing a roof with him would feel transactional. She hadn't expected to find herself listening for the sound of his boots on the porch, noticing the way the sunlight caught the faint silver at his temples, or wondering why he sometimes stared out across the plains as if he were looking for something, or someone. Hank noticed too. One afternoon, as Charlotte was checking the ledger in her father's old office, Hank leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "That new husband of yours works hard," he said. "That's what I hired him for," Charlotte replied without looking up. Hank's tone was unreadable. Hard work's one thing, but a man with eyes like his? He's seen things, and men who've seen things tend to bring trouble with them. Charlotte closed the ledger and met his gaze. "Trouble or not, he's here to help me keep this ranch. That's all that matters." Hank's mouth twitched in something between a smirk and a warning. "Just remember, Mrs. Cole, trouble doesn't always knock before it comes through the door." The evenings were the hardest. The house was too big for two people who didn't know each other well. Her father had filled it with his voice, his laughter, the sound of his boots on the stairs. Now the silence stretched long and heavy. One rainy night, she found Ethan in the parlor, seated by the fire, sharpening his knife. The firelight danced across the blade, casting sharp glints that matched the shadows on his face. "You don't have to work in the rain," she said, moving to pour herself a cup of coffee from the sideboard. "I don't mind the rain," he replied, eyes on the steel. Keeps the dust down. Makes the cattle restless, though. She took the chair opposite him, cradling her mug. You've been quiet since you got here. Most men would have tried to make conversation by now. Most men, he said without looking up, don't marry someone they just met. Charlotte allowed herself a small smile. So you do think it's strange? I think it's unusual. He finally set the knife down, leaning back in his chair. But I also think you've got more grit than most men I've met. Her smile faded into something more guarded. Flattery won't get you anywhere here. Wasn't meant as flattery, he said, his gaze steady on hers. Just truth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire popped, sending a stray spark up the chimney. Charlotte felt the air shift. Not quite friendly, not quite hostile, something in between. The next morning brought more than just sunlight. A letter arrived, delivered by a boy from town. Charlotte read it at the breakfast table, her brow tightening. What is it? Ethan asked, pausing mid-bite. Caldwell from the bank. He's requesting a meeting. Says it's urgent. Ethan studied her for a moment. That the same Caldwell who came sniffing around last month? Yes. He's been pressuring me to sell off the southern pasture. Claims it's underutilized. She set the letter down. If I sell him that land, we lose our water rights on the creek. Without that, this ranch is done. Ethan's voice was quiet, but there was a hard edge beneath it. Then you can't sell. I know that, but men like Caldwell don't take no for an answer. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, something sharp, almost dangerous. Then he needs to understand the answer won't change. Charlotte hesitated, a thought stirring at the back of her mind. Who exactly was Ethan Cole before he came here? A drifter? A ranch hand? Or something more complicated? That Sunday, they rode into town together for supplies. The stares were immediate, whispered speculation trailing behind them like dust. In the general store, Mrs. Lillian Price leaned over the counter, all saccharine smile. Why, Charlotte, we hardly see you here with company. And such fine company at that. Ethan tipped his hat politely, but Charlotte could feel the weight of the woman's curiosity. We'll take flour, sugar, coffee, and nails, Charlotte said briskly, ignoring the probing tone. Outside, as they loaded the supplies onto the wagon, Ethan remarked, Your town's got a long memory. And a longer tongue, Charlotte replied. He glanced sideways at her. Does it bother you what they say? She tightened the last strap on the wagon. I learned a long time ago that people will talk, whether you give them reason to or not. I don't know them my truth. His gaze lingered on her for a moment before he climbed onto the driver's bench. That night, Charlotte couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. She stepped into the hallway and saw a faint light spilling from Ethan's room. She knocked lightly. You awake? His voice came through the door. Come in. He was seated at the small desk, a map spread before him. It wasn't a map of Montana. It was older, worn, edges frayed. She moved closer, recognizing landmarks she'd never seen before. That's not local, she said. No, he replied, rolling it up. It's from another time. Another place. She waited for more, but he said nothing. You've got secrets, she said finally. So do you, he countered. They stood there for a long moment, the air between them charged with unasked questions. Finally, Charlotte turned to leave. Before she stepped out, he said quietly, I'll help you keep this ranch, Charlotte, no matter what it costs. She didn't ask what he meant. Some promises were easier to accept without knowing their price. By the end of the second week, one thing was clear. Ethan Cole might be her husband in name only, but he was now entwined in the fate of the Beaumont Ranch. Whether that would save her or destroy them both remained to be seen. The first frost of the season came early. By dawn, the pasture shimmered silver, and the air stung with a sharpness that made every breath feel cleaner and colder. Charlotte pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped onto the porch. From where she stood, she could see Ethan in the lower pasture, moving with quiet precision as he repaired a section of fence. There was something about the way he worked, methodical, but with a focus that went beyond the task. He moved like a man trained to think ahead, scanning the tree line, the ridge, the ground beneath his feet. Not like a ranch hand. Like a soldier. Hank came up from the barn carrying a saddle blanket. Been watching him. Charlotte didn't answer right away. He works harder than most. Works harder, watches harder, Hank said. And I saw him rewrap that fence wire twice, like he was set in a trap instead of mending a pasture. Charlotte frowned. You think he's hiding something? I think he's more than what he told you, Hank replied. Question is, what happens when that more comes knocking? Later that morning, a rider approached from town. It was Sheriff Boone, his frame tall and spare in the saddle, his face weathered from years under the sun. He tipped his hat to Charlotte as she came down the steps. Mrs. Cole, he greeted, voice polite but carrying the weight of unfinished business. Is your husband around? Ethan appeared before she could answer, wiping his hands on a rag. I'm here. What's the trouble? Boone studied him with the kind of gaze that measured more than a man's height and weight. It measured his past. Troubles in town. Caldwell's been stirring folks up, saying the Beaumont ranch isn't over its head. Claims he's got legal papers ready to start repossession. Charlotte felt the cold settle deeper in her bones. He can't. Boone cut her off with a slow nod. Maybe not yet, but he's looking for leverage. And rumor is he's digging into your new husband's history. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. Then Caldwell's gonna find his shovel hits rock. Boone didn't look convinced. Just thought you ought to know. Watch your back. When the sheriff rode off, Charlotte turned to Ethan. Why would Caldwell be interested in your history? He met her gaze evenly. Because it's easier to scare you if you don't know who you're standing beside. That's not an answer, she said. It's the only one you're getting right now. That evening, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Charlotte was in the kitchen when she heard movement in the hallway. Stepping out, she caught sight of Ethan heading toward the east wing, the one her father had closed off years before, claiming it was unsafe. You're not supposed to be in there, she called. Ethan froze, hand on the doorknob. You mean we're not supposed to? Your rules, remember? Yes, she said carefully. And they're there for a reason. He studied her for a moment before stepping back from the door. Fair enough. But the way his eyes lingered on it told her he hadn't lost interest. The next day, while Ethan was out riding fence, Caldwell himself arrived in a fine carriage, wearing his smugness like a tailored suit. Charlotte met him at the gate, arms crossed. Come to make another offer? She asked. I've come to give you a warning, Caldwell replied, voice oily. Your new husband? He's not who you think. Man's got a trail behind him that's longer than the Chisholm, and it's catching up. Charlotte's heart thudded hard against her ribs, but she didn't let it show. You don't scare me, Caldwell. You should, he said, leaning in, because when the truth comes out, you'll wish you'd sold to me. He left in a swirl of dust, his words lingering like the scent of rot. That night, she found Ethan in the barn, checking the tack in silence. Caldwell was here, she said. I figured, he replied without looking at her. He says you have a past that's coming for you. Ethan set down the bridle he was holding and finally met her eyes. He's not wrong. I do have a past, but it's not one I'm ashamed of. Then tell me, she pressed. He hesitated, the pause stretching too long. Not yet. She stepped closer. You can't keep saying, not yet. This is my ranch, my life. Whatever trouble you bring here, it'll find me too. His gaze softened, just slightly, and that's why I'm making sure it doesn't. The next morning, Charlotte woke to the sound of voices outside. Looking from her window, she saw two strangers at the gate, hard-faced men with dust on their coats and revolvers at their hips. Ethan stood between them and the house, his stance rigid, one hand resting casually near his holster. She couldn't hear their words, but she could see the tension in every line of his body. One man pointed toward the house, and Ethan stepped forward, saying something low and sharp. Whatever it was made both men stiffen before they turned and rode off. When Ethan came inside, Charlotte was waiting. Who were they? No one you need to worry about. Ethan. Charlotte. His tone cut off further questions. You asked me to help you keep this ranch. That's what I'm doing. But if you're going to trust me to do that, Then you have to trust me to handle what comes with it." She stared at him, frustration and curiosity battling inside her. "And if I can't? Then you'll have to decide if you want me gone before the next knock on that gate," he said quietly. That night, as the fire in the parlor burned low, Charlotte thought about the way those strangers had looked at Ethan, not with suspicion, but with recognition, like men who'd seen him before, in another life, under another name. The mask Ethan wore was slipping, whether he wanted it to or not. And when it finally fell, Charlotte knew there'd be no turning back from whatever truth it revealed. The wind outside carried the scent of winter and the promise of change. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the ranch fence, trouble was waiting, and Charlotte had the uneasy feeling that trouble already knew its way to their door. The storm broke just before dawn. Rain lashed the roof in furious bursts, and the wind moaned against the shutters like some restless spirit pacing outside. Charlotte woke to the sound of boots in the hallway. She rose, pulling her robe tight, and stepped into the corridor. Ethan was there, already dressed, a satchel slung over his shoulder. "Where are you going?" she demanded. He paused, the lamplight catching the planes of his face. "To end this." "And what?" "Caldwell," he said simply. "And the men he's sending after me." Charlotte's pulse hammered. "You think I'll just let you ride off into whatever mess you've been hiding? You owe me the truth." He exhaled slowly, the fight in his posture softening. "I'm not the man you think I am. My name's not Ethan Cole. It's Ethan Callahan. My father was William Callahan." Charlotte blinked. "Callahan, as in the Callahan Ranch?" Ethan nodded. "The same. My father's ranch was the largest in 3 counties until Caldwell and his partners bled it dry with false claims and forged contracts. He died before he could clear his name. I walked away to keep my family's debt from swallowing me whole. Changed my name. Started over." Charlotte's mind reeled. "So you married me." "I married you because you needed someone who wouldn't sell you out, and because Caldwell hates that I'm still breathing." Lightning split the sky, throwing shadows like knives across the walls. Charlotte stared at him, torn between anger at the deception and the strange relief of knowing the man beside her was more than a drifter. By mid-morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world scrubbed clean and raw. But trouble came faster than the drying earth. From the ridge, Charlotte spotted a line of riders, 6 men, Caldwell's brand on their slickers, cutting across the lower pasture. Ethan saw them too. "They're here to force your hand," he said. "Either you sign over the deed, or they make life so dangerous you'll beg to." Charlotte squared her shoulders. "Over my dead body." "That's exactly what Caldwell's counting on." The riders stopped at the front gate. Caldwell himself sat in the lead, his smirk sharp enough to cut glass. "Mrs. Cole," he called, ignoring Ethan. "I've come for your answer." "You already have it," Charlotte said, standing tall on the porch. "No sale." Caldwell's smile widened. "You've got spirit, but spirit doesn't stop creditors or hungry men with nowhere else to go." He turned his gaze to Ethan. "And you're harder to kill than your father." Ethan stepped off the porch, boots crunching in the wet gravel. "You'll get one warning, Caldwell. Leave now." The air thickened, tension stretching so tight it felt like the world might snap. Caldwell's men shifted in their saddles, hands twitching near their weapons. Then Caldwell laughed, a sound without joy. "You can't shoot your way out of the truth, Callahan. The law's on my side." "Not anymore," Ethan said. He pulled a folded paper from his coat and tossed it onto the mud at Caldwell's feet. "That's a signed statement from Judge Avery. Every contract you forged, every acre you stole, it's all in there. Sheriff Boone's got the rest." Caldwell's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. "You think a piece of paper scares me?" "No," Ethan said, voice low and steady. "But losing everything you've built on lies does." The standoff ended without gunfire, but not without consequences. Caldwell wheeled his horse and rode off, his men trailing behind like shadows reluctant to leave. Charlotte turned to Ethan. "How long have you had that statement?" "A week," he admitted. "Been waiting for the right moment. But once Caldwell showed up here, I knew it was time." She studied him, the weight of his choices pressing against her heart. "You could have told me." "I could have," he said softly, "but I needed you to trust me first." "And do you trust me?" she asked. Ethan's eyes held hers. "With my life." The days that followed were quiet, almost eerily so. Word spread through Dust Rock that Caldwell had been called to testify in front of the county judge. His power was slipping, and people who once feared him now crossed the street to avoid his gaze. Charlotte and Ethan worked side by side, mending fences, tending cattle, and beginning the slow work of turning the ranch profitable again. But there was something else in the air between them now, an unspoken understanding born from fire and truth. One evening, as the sun bled gold over the plains, Charlotte found Ethan on the porch, staring toward the horizon. "You know," she said, leaning against the railing, "you never told me what happens after all this, once Caldwell's gone." He glanced at her, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "I stay, if you'll have me." Her chest tightened in a way that was both frightening and warm. This was supposed to be a bargain, Ethan, a practical arrangement. "Maybe it still is," he said, "but I'd like to think we're building more than that now." Charlotte looked out at the land, the wide, wild sweep of it, the kind of view that could make a person believe in second chances. "Then I guess we both got more than we bargained for." The night was still when Ethan finally put the Callahan name back on his saddle, a quiet act that felt like a claim staked not just on the land, but on the life he'd rebuilt. Charlotte watched him from the doorway, the lamplight framing her like a beacon. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight of the past shift into something else, not a burden, but a foundation. And standing beside Charlotte, he knew he wasn't just the heir to a name or a ranch. He was the heir to a future worth fighting for.